Elouise, and enjoy the next hour.
All right. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And I will say that I have been a fan of Elouise for a very long time. So anytime that I get the opportunity to speak with her and have her share her thoughts to audiences, I jump right on board. So I am thrilled to be here with her. And Elouise, I thought we could just start today with I always love having introductions, although that was a lovely introduction, Jeffrey, but I would love to hear from Elouise herself around what she's passionate about and what she would like to be known for in the industry. So Elouise?
Well, first of all, you all are very kind. Thank you. And I will try not to let it go to my head. And actually, we talked about this in our breakout. What I want to be known for is moving the procurement industry, being part of the movement of the procurement industry forward into the digital age. And just like the SDI transformation, that I think it's very similar and echoes what I think a lot of procurement organizations, the way Jim described it. And so I am unabashedly provocative, disruptive, and am not willing to accept the status quo. I am very, you should, if you think I'm disruptive externally, you should see me internally. I am not afraid to call out bad or lazy consulting, as much as I'm not afraid to call out bad or lazy technology. And I think there's a lot of both. And so I think it's fair, if we're going to ask you to go as a procurement organization through a transformation to the future, I think it's fair that you get the best, you're equipped with the best tools and the best frameworks. And too often, I think we've all seen really old frameworks that just get trotted out and have a new buzzword added to them. And I refuse to accept that. So that's one part of the question. By the way, I should tell you I'm long-winded. Amanda knows this. So
we have a sign.
Like, yeah. But the other part is, I think 2020 is the greatest time to be in procurement, because I've been here for 2 decades, and I've watched a whole bunch of innovation in the early 2000s, kind of spawned by the initial ERP boom of the late 90s. And then I saw it all kind of collapse and consolidate and generally get very mediocre, and people kind of got, the organizations got mediocre. And I think that's changed over the last 5-6 years. I've seen that start to change. And so as I look ahead to the next decade, what I see is great technology, because that's where I focus, but I see great people. I mean, Amanda likes presenting with me. Well, I like presenting with Amanda. I think she's one of the most wonderful, innovative, and smart people in this market. And ISM recognizes her, and she's on a number of their boards, including the one she brought me into. And so I think there are, and RSN, I believe, is one of the sponsors. Sarah is an amazing person in this market, and the innovation that she's doing, and even Jim, I was kind of inspired by what you were saying. And so I think every time I turn around, I meet people like this, and I think there's a willingness to change and a willingness to embrace the future. And then just my last little tagline on why I'm so excited. The commercial side of the business, doing sales, all that's been solved. Like, we don't need, there's no green field there. That's been solved. But what hasn't been solved is operations, procurement, supply chain. I think it's going to be great for the next decade. So I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for being here, and thanks for sharing your passion with us. So what we thought that we could do today is we could have a discussion between us around what we're seeing in the marketplace, what we have learned, and what we are going to hopefully experience here in the near future. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I hope everyone's game for that. we thought, you know, with all the Zoom fatigue and everything, no PowerPoints from us today. It is going to be a conversation. We hope that you chat with us, think of your questions, and this is going to be a very fluid environment where we can bring in your questions as on the fly or answer them at the end. We're hopefully going to have about 15 minutes at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So with that said, I'm going to kick it off to you, Elouise, and then I have a lot of thoughts on this question too, but we've been learning an awful lot this year, haven't we? It's been good, it's been bad, it's been ugly in certain points, but I think what we can all agree on is that we're learning an awful lot. So what, from your perspective, have we learned through COVID and 2020 so far?
Oh my God, this is going to take like 4 hours to get through this question. What have we learned? Well, one, let's just jump into one, and then I will sort of, it's all related to suppliers, but we learned that risk modeling was, or our attempts at risk were woefully inadequate. And so that means every vendor that does quote unquote risk management, every consultant that did a risk model for you, everybody that said they were a risk person, basically in March got exposed for being a fraud. So I have yet to find, I found one client so far that actually had pandemic in their risk modeling, and they actually had run a test. Now they have a ton of money. You can guess what region they're in. So they had time and money and resources to do that. And what that's reflective of is risk just hasn't been a priority. And everything that has been a priority is cost. Everything is cost. And we have ratcheted up the cost equation to the nth degree. And you've got Kearney consultants out there doing hyper optimization to squeeze every drop of cost out at the expense of risk, at the expense of diverse suppliers, at the expense of sustainability, at the expense of innovation. And so that's probably the biggest one. And maybe I'll flip it right back to Amanda and to get the dialogue going. But I think the way we look at our supply base is just so fundamentally wrong in terms of cost only. And Amanda, you work with a lot of suppliers, especially smaller ones. I'd be curious for your feedback on, or
no. So it's been wonderful to see, and then heartbreaking to see at the same time what we're going through with COVID. So I, for the large part of the time during COVID, with my businesses, we had the opportunity to help over 1,000 small companies get access to PPP loans, which is not what I was intending to do with my business, but we saw an opportunity to help, so we did that. And but what was interesting was the stories that we were hearing, and the stories around who was contacting them, how they were being engaged, and what happened if and when they were. So I like to give an example of a company that's been around since 1901. They're a commercial carpet cleaning company. And I was asking the owner, I was like, so cleaning's probably pretty important right now in COVID, right? Like you want to have clean buildings. How have your customers been engaging you? And he said, basically nobody has contacted him except for cutting purchase orders, like as in canceling purchase orders. And he was really distraught about it because he's like, I have so many solutions where I could help them be more innovative, continue to reduce their costs, but make sure that they have clean buildings that they can go back into. So it was a light bulb moment for me, because I was like, wow, we have such an opportunity through this crisis to be looking at our suppliers differently. He was a smaller company, but could have a huge impact on everyone coming back to work. But he just frankly was not being engaged. Now, on the other hand, we had some companies that said, I had 1 or 2 people contact me, and the ones that did are going to be getting our best people moving forward. Like the procurement organizations were proactive. They wanted to truly understand how that supplier was doing in this marketplace. And they were truly trying to help them survive this very, very difficult time. And if you're able to do that, it goes such a long way in that relationship. You were going to say something, Elouise.
Well, yeah, no, and that kind of gets to this broader point about is our processes are so anchored in the past. This upstream, downstream paradigm, this idea that we do this, and Kearney has perpetuated this too, this very linear process of supplier identification, sourcing, on and on, requisitioning, payment, et cetera. Well, the other thing that COVID blew up was that process, and it's an inadequate process. We have to organize procurement fundamentally around agile, and I don't mean in the term everybody's throwing around, or nimble. We have to be nimble, that we can rapidly get groups of people together and attack problems. Because, and to tie it to what Amanda just said, that's how we actually can stop and say, oh, wait, we should engage with these suppliers. Anybody that's doing facilities management or janitorial, let's stop and talk to them. Maybe we should just develop a little more relationship management. And the reason we don't is what I alluded to before, is you have tier 1 suppliers. Like, these are your top 100, and the next 9,999 or 900 we don't care about. Well, that's not acceptable. Like, COVID has taught us that's not acceptable. And so, Amanda, to connect the two, that's exactly why we need completely new processes.
Yeah. I would love to see in the coming years, and even right now, this concept I've been kicking around called compassionate procurement. Like, if we really think about our role in business, if we tackle, if we look at our role as being the point for all of those great suppliers that are coming into our network, to really be compassionate with them and build a relationship built on trust and empathy, what kind of, I guess, we're going to throw all the boundaries out the window, because then all of a sudden we are going to see these suppliers stepping up their game, driving innovation, not only innovation, but I would say differentiated innovation, where you might have access to an innovation that supplier is delivering that nobody else does. And so that's just one aspect of compassionate procurement. You could have compassionate procurement in sustainability, where you're looking at, how do I bring up the best new suppliers or new concepts in the marketplace by working with them and throwing out the 35-page contract that we're making them sign and all those insurance requirements. But then looking at, how are they sustainable? Like, are there sustainable solutions that we could be bringing in that offer our customers a better value than what we're doing today? I like to use, I could talk about this all day long, by the way, if you guys can't realize that, but there was a airline in Asia that they were trying to reduce their plastic footprint, their one-time plastic footprint, and they came up with basically a biscotti coffee cup. It was a coffee cup made out of cookies, okay? So it went off like wildfire, and that was an innovation that a supplier brought to bear, and it solved a large problem that they were trying to solve at the overall level of the company, and the customers raved about it. So that's the kind of, if we look at our role as being more compassionate and more holistic than just cost savings, oh my gosh, we are going places as a profession if we can nail that. And I think COVID has been a turning point for us.
Well, I love the compassionate, what did you call it? Compassionate procurement. Yeah.
Yep.
I thought it was 2 C's. Anyway, that's what tripped me up there. But imagine you go into March of this year and you've just, shaken your suppliers for a few extra nickels, especially the ones that do janitorial supplies, and torture them. And then all of a sudden you have a shortage of PPE or hand sanitizer or whatever. And now you need a favor because your manufacturing plants can't operate in whatever region. You guess what? That supplier may not actually, you may not have as much power as you think you do. And so they may not be quite as willing to do that favor for you. So I'm very much a big proponent of this compassionate procurement. And I will add to that the sustainability. as we
Yeah.
talk about sustainability and diverse suppliers, and I will talk about
Yes.
both,
Yeah.
I think that's at the top of procurement's agenda. And in fact, this morning I was talking to an oil and gas company, their head of supply chain, and they wanted to know what to do. I've gotten this a couple of times. They wanted to know how to advance. Both their CEOs have made the net carbon neutral by 2050.
Mm-hmm.
Although Tim Cook just upped the game on that this morning by making it 2030, but for Apple.
Right.
But even at 2050, these oil and gas companies don't know what to do. And my challenge back to both these heads of supply chain are, you should get in the driver's seat and drive this, because you can drive it because you're controlling the external spend. You can drive it with the suppliers you do. You can drive it by changing your allocations and your constraints in the sourcing and award process. You can drive it in your contract compliance, in your supplier identification, and you're reporting it on and on and on. And innovation, like Amanda, I can do the same thing. And that playbook is the same thing for supplier diversity. The fact that even companies that are good at supplier diversity and can get themselves into the billion-dollar roundtable, and I know we have some DuPont folks, and I was actually talking to Shelley Stewart this morning in case for those of you from the Dow DuPont era. We have a work there to do too. It can't be just, because it can't be because it looks good optically. It has to be part of the fabric of how we operate and the reason for doing it. And just the digital flavor on both of those is, as we think about requisitioning systems and supplier identification and sourcing, there's an invisible hand. The same algorithm that Amazon uses to get us to buy more things than we thought we wanted, is the same one we can use to get to put the diverse suppliers front and center, the sustainable suppliers front and center, without the user qualified, but without the users knowing it. And that can move the needle.
Yeah, absolutely. So you bring up digital. Let's talk a little bit about digital. And if you guys all of this is wrapped around in change, right? How the organization is changing, how we're going to be using the digital assets differently now and into the future. And then we're going to get into how do you get your arms around all of this and actually make the change happen. So let's talk a little bit about digital. So we're sitting here, we have 34 people on the line today, and this was supposed to be an in-person conference, but now we're using a digital way of interacting, and this is becoming more and more a part of our lives each and every day. But how does the digital factor into the present and going forward for procurement?
To me, it's digital first, and digital has been an afterthought. And even if you look at our assessments, any procurement assessment, you can be a leader and still have bad technology. That was the realization I had 2 years ago, which just kind of sent me beating my head against the wall. Because how can you have leaders in procurement if you don't have spend visibility, or if you don't have your contract broken out by clauses that are tied to what your activity is? How can you have a lead? How can you lead in procurement without analytics? And most folks can't even answer what procurement analytics is. And so I went back to the drawing board to get clear on these answers, and that's a lot of what I talk about. And I think that this is what has to change. Is everything has to be digital first now. If you're going through an org transformation, it's digital. New op model, it's digital. And I am tirelessly torturing my colleagues about this, because they want to go sell regular op models and org transformations. And I'm screaming at them, not literally, not at least not in my mind, that I'm like, you cannot do this, because if you're not making it digital first, you are setting up something that will not sustain. There is way too much innovation, and Jim, I'm picking on you a little bit, but like the SDI thing is like those kinds of innovations come to the market. You've got to be aware of them, and RSN as well. And all of a sudden, the way you're operating has to be very digitally driven and enabled. And I spend a lot of my time looking at digital solutions, and it's just amazing. I'll say it this way: technology for procurement has arrived. It's here. There's no, and what that means is no more excuses. You cannot blame the data anymore. You cannot blame the systems for X, Y, or Z. There's no more excuses. And so in what that's doing is that's shifting how you operate. And so fundamentally it's agile, and then it's agile to take advantage of it, and it's all these digital capabilities.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this lately around, you mentioned risk right out of the gates, what we've learned in 2020 so far. And I was hearing from some of my previous, my network during all of this, and they were saying things like, India is shut down, my processing center is shut down, I can't process any purchase orders or receive invoices. Or when things got bad here, it was, hey, I have all of these paper invoices, but I have no one in the office to process them. So there was a lot of, process gaps that we had because of the lack of technology. So I've been thinking a lot about I know where you're going with the bigger picture and procurement and everything, but practically for risk mitigation, if this were to happen to us again next year, wouldn't we want to have all of these to be digitally enabled so that we can reduce or mitigate the risks moving forward? I think it's an absolute must-have now.
Yeah, I mean, you perfect example, right? I mean, and it's also new ways of working, because we now the beginning of this was we're talking about Zoom and the dog walking in the background, and I'm sure my dogs will howl at some point, and kids walking. Like, that is the new way of working, and we need tools. And you're right, I always lose sight of the fundamental, like the digitization. If you have paper invoices, well then, I mean, yeah, they're collecting in some office that nobody can go to. Right.
And what type of ramifications? I mean, you tie that into a small business who's waiting for payment, and now everything's shut down, and they're not getting money anywhere else, and you can't pay them because an invoice is stacked up in some office somewhere. It all ties together, and you can't get to it's harder to get to the reporting and the data if you're not digitally enabled. So you have a stack of paper invoices, as an example, sitting on someone's desk. You have no idea how many are in that stack. So if your management is asking you, well, how far behind are we on invoice processing? You might have an estimate. Like on average, we used to process 100 a day or whatever, and we're now 3 days behind, but you have no idea exactly how many invoices are sitting on that desk. So, and I only bring up the paper invoicing because it's a very simple fix, but we have been talking about it for 18 years since I started in the industry, right? In the profession. Awesome. And we still haven't cracked the nut. I'm glad to hear that the technology is here to be able to solve all of that. Now we need the people and the leaders and the investments to make all of that happen. So I'm happy that it's all starting to come together, and we have a real firm reason to get this done.
Yeah, I mean, it all coalesces now. And I think you are seeing a new crop of CPOs that are taking the helm and not accepting this, the status quo, because they've seen this. They see what I see. But I also think you could take your example one step further is, well, by the way, if you digitize all those invoices, that gives you a better sustainability score. So that's
yes, it does.
Yes, so that's one thing. There's a huge carbon offset there.
Yeah.
But I think in this COVID time, knowing like what your contract terms are, knowing where folks are, and in some suppliers, you're going to have to front them money or give them, financing, or do the reverse of dynamic discounting, you can't really get to that level of you can't use those financial instruments if you just don't have the basic invoicing, capability. And so what you create is an inability to do what you need to do in the midst of a crisis.
Yes.
And so many small businesses, as Amanda was talking, and I'd be curious for your reaction to this, of course, is what happens, like so many small businesses, like you could lose a third of your supply base just going bankrupt. And I've seen companies, enterprises, extend loans or credit and so forth. So Amanda, that's your area. So
I know we saw it a lot. And we also saw that some procurement organizations were going out just carte blanche and asking for payment term extensions, which just kills the small supplier. Others were being a little bit more practical and saying we can't do that to our small and diverse suppliers, but we will take opportunities where we can. So it was liking to see more and more of that. It was one of the first experiences in my career where we actually were taking a step back and saying we can't just do that to all of our suppliers. We need to be very practical in how we approach the supply base, so we don't, when we turn back on the lights fully, have 30% of our supply base gone. But it is a real factor. And I think as procurement professionals today, we should be planning on at least 25% of our suppliers not making it through this, no matter what we do. And how is that going to impact your supplier diversity program? If you have one, how is it going to impact your supply chains? We're seeing it day in and day out. I've worked with over 1,000 suppliers right now just on this particular PPP program, and we were calling some of them back, and several of them said, we're already out of business. We couldn't even make it that long. So I think that we really need to be proactive heading into this to understand that the supply base that you had pre-COVID is not going to be the same post-COVID. You're going to be buying different things, which is obvious. I think all of us have experienced that so far, but some suppliers, and I would estimate probably around 25%, are not going to make it through it. So go ahead.
And actually that gets to, and by the way, Tamara, I see your question.
I know, we're going to get to it. Yes.
But I have to make this point because this is where and you brought it up a moment ago, Amanda, contracts, right? We have to have much more granularity and specificity in the contracts, and they have to be accessible, and we have to understand what our payment terms are, because if you look through 1,000 contracts at an enterprise, do you know how many variations in payment terms you have? And even if you don't have to necessarily consolidate them into a single one, but you have to know what they are. And you need that level of specificity, because in this kind of a disruption and you need to be able to not necessarily just cancel the contract carte blanche. You need all these financial tools that we're talking about and abilities to connect. You want that you want a contract that you can open up, and I'm desperately trying to avoid using the word living and breathing because I hate that term, but that you want something that's, it's like right out of my head. You want something that's really
it's going to be agile, like you mentioned before. It allows you to flex.
Much
right?
better.
Yes. Yeah. Now we're finishing each other's sentences. This is great.
I love it.
So Tamara, I love your question. I'm going to build this into the next question that we had planned, because I think they go really well together. So Tamara's question was, do you believe you need to have a digital roadmap, and is it necessary before picking a solution? And I want to tie that into, what are the near and long-term investments that any organization should be looking at to help their digital footprint?
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of roadmaps, because and actually architecture / strategy when it comes to digital, because too often we haven't done that. That's like something that procurement organizations haven't like stopped and designed the architecture, the roadmap, and the strategy. We just kind of bumble along and buy Ariba or Coupa or whatever the flavor is of that popularity that year. So, so I think that's, I think you have to take a step back and say, what's the foundational system? What gaps do I have? And then what are the areas of value that I can add on top of that? And so I can see all the questions coming in.
I know, I know. So,
So,
this is great. So I actually have a story to share with you. So I went into a client last year, and they were going through one of the typical digital implementations of a P2P solution. And I asked them, why are you implementing this solution? It's like a pretty logical question. Like, why did you do this? Why did you make the investment? And they said, because everyone else is doing it. And I was like, oh boy. And they were struggling. They were struggling with the story. They were struggling with inspiring people through the change. They were struggling. Frankly, nobody was using the tool. They had very limited adoption. And so both internally and with their suppliers, by the way. But it's because if they couldn't even answer the reason why they're doing it, you're going to have a really long road ahead. Yeah. So to me, it's great to have the strategy, and the strategy should all be around why are you making the investments and how is it going to get you to move forward, and where can you leverage those technologies to really make a statement in the value that you offer to the organization and to really, frankly, the communities around us.
Right, and to prioritize. And I think that, so, and there's some that are fundamental, right? If you don't have spend visibility, A, shame on you. B, actually, you can solve that, right? A lot of these are solvable. Get a core P2P system in, because that's going to, especially if you have a proliferation of ERP systems, you can have a nice backbone to handle, to support that. So that's number one. Number two is get some more sophisticated sourcing tools. Most folks don't use. When we set up sourcing programs, I advocate for the use of 5 different tools, and probably that number will grow. And that's because that's the amount of specificity you need to. And there's different types of solutions for different, like sourcing services is way totally different than sourcing transportation, which is totally different than sourcing, office supplies. So you need these tools in your toolkit. And then, by the way, just for the record, I have a very fancy slide that sets us all up, but I have no slides today. And then the other one is contract management, and just having your contracts in a single place. And then, as I was talking about, extracting the key, doing some analytics on it. And the other sort of fundamental one is forecasting. And as procurement, we have, like this plan, source, make, deliver tower structure, I think is counterproductive, because it allows source people to sit in their tower and not look upstream into plan. And arguably, plan's the most important, especially as you're communicating and interacting with your supply base. So, Amanda, that was a long-winded piece about where to look first, because any one of those, if you have gaps, are the ones to attack. I can give you 24 others after that, but those are value creators, efficiency creators, and effectiveness creators.
Okay. All right. So I know I haven't even been watching the time. So someone stop me when we're like getting 15 minutes to the end, because we could talk about this stuff all day long. So I wanted to jump over to a couple of questions that are coming in. So one was about which suppliers are not making it through, if they're more on the goods or services side, or if it's a mix. In my perspective, it's been a mix. I know services have been hit pretty hard, where everything kind of came to a screeching halt for a while, and procurement was focusing on getting the necessary supplies in the door. And so that services took a big hit impact. But then if you were looking at manufacturers, if they were diversified in other markets that have taken a hit, you're seeing also on the goods side taking its toll, especially as we're continuing to keep for the reasons that are out there, keeping the economy a little bit slower than what it used to be. So that is that answer there. So Let's talk about how would you change the dialogue where business free cash flow, 120 days is the example, is conflicting with compassionate procurement and long-term supply risk management. If you're facing an organization that's like cash flow, cash flow, cash flow, and you need to change somebody's mind, how would you go about doing that? I don't know if you have any ideas or, yeah.
Yeah, I think there are very sophisticated financial tools available. When we talk about dynamic discounting and supply chain financing and tax optimization and a lot of tools. And by the way, I'm not a finance person, so I'm bumping up against the boundaries of my expertise here. But what I know is I do know that the contracting terms, and I know that having the flexibility to work with the suppliers, because we work with companies that have 120-day terms, and that's once everything's approved. So that creates a lot of supply base issues. And so I am attuned to this argument. And I think you can get those savings elsewhere, because essentially what you're doing is you're putting the onus on the supplier and you're squeezing the supplier in every possible way in that 120-day scenario. And I don't think you can ensure continuity, supply chain continuity in a risk perspective if you do that. And so I think you could look at it compassionately, but you could also look at it from a risk point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always like to take a step back when I get into those discussions and talk about the bigger picture. What are we actually trying to solve for? And maybe there's a different way to solve for it than extending to 120 days. There's a lot of ways to have an impact on cash flow in organizations, and so I always like to say, okay, let's take a step back, look at what we're trying to achieve, and let's have a planful thought about the decisions that we make and how it's impacting other areas of the organization. So good stuff there. And that leads into our next question. How do we think about value versus cost savings, and how has that changed through all of this?
So here's my provocative statement on cost savings. I have all this newfangled digital technology, right? And let's just for argument's sake say that it's successful and I can put it in, and maybe not 100% today, but over the next, 2 years, 1 to 2 years, and I do all this stuff and I get it in place. But you know what that's going to give me? It's going to give me an annual 10% cost savings. Right? So in other words, digital is going to drive that. And in many ways, either through automation or open marketplaces or whatever, but all of a sudden that cost savings is going to come from the digital tools. So then my question becomes well, then what are all the procurement people going to be doing if we're not chasing cost savings? And that's where I think we get this pivot into strategic procurement. Now, to be fair, consultants have been talking about strategic procurement for 20 plus years. That's all I've heard for 20 years. And I have yet to see it actually make its way into the operational piece. And I think when we get these tools fully onboarded, fully vetted, they become fully mature, and we stop focusing on cost savings, we stop focusing on invoice management or opening paper invoices and then I think we start to move towards more advanced risk modeling, where I started, because COVID has told us that we need better risk modeling, into sustainability, because the corporate objectives, the consumer objectives, again, think about what Tim Cook did today. He just put everybody on notice that if you're going to compete in consumer, especially electronics, you better be sustainable. And look for Amazon and Salesforce and everybody else to follow suit. That means the oil and gas folks are moving from 2050 to maybe begrudgingly 2038, or whatever they can do. that moves the needle. So you need sustainability. Actually, is not a nice. It's not compassionate procurement. It's like it's the basic level of maturity.
Yeah.
And the same for diversity. And I think out of the what we've learned in society today is it's also going to be the price of entry to not only give business to the diverse suppliers, but to actually build them up and make them integral into your operations. And it's been done on a one-off basis. And Shelley Stewart, who I referenced earlier, has a good track record of doing that. I think we need that operational and scale way more. And then the last piece is innovation, right? And Amanda, you had a good example of innovation, around facilities and janitorial and cleaning. I think you need innovation up and down the line. So my point is everything beyond cost savings is where the focus is going to be. And the young procurement people that are entering the organizations are motivated and driven to do this.
Yeah. And it's going to change. I had a conversation with someone yesterday about how it's going to change how we're measured, like what our goals are. And it has been, for my entire career, it's been cost savings. And then you might be able to get some cost avoidance in there or value add, but it is going to be a game changer around how we are measured each and every day. And that I hope to see that the cost, even though everyone's talking about cash is king and we're trying to drive out cost right now, and that's a big theme that you're seeing across the industry right now. But I really hope that it's broader than that. And when we take a look at what we've experienced this year, it's proving that we need to go that direction.
Wait, before you go on,
yeah.
let's just talk about the elephant in the room about cost savings, because most cost savings is monkey math.
Yes, it is.
It's just a shell game that the CFO doesn't believe, that we beat the drum and say we are so great that we did this, and it's not sustainable unto itself. And if you look and I've been working in a lot of directs lately, what the commodity managers do is a total shell game. It's they're not.
Yeah. So fundamentally, we've talked again my entire career around how nobody believes our numbers, and we don't have a seat at the table, and we don't have stakeholder relationships. I mean, that it just seems to be an ongoing thing, and I think fundamentally it's because of how we've been measured. To your earlier point, so my eyes were open to all of this when I worked at MGM, because MGM highly regulated and it's a casino operator. Each and every time we open a property in most states, there are regulations around how we help the communities around us. So all of a sudden I got exposed to, oh my goodness, procurement. If we look at procurement as a way to help the communities around us and as a way to help our organizations be thriving for the next 50 to 100 years, that's a game changer. Then all of a sudden the paradigms of cost savings go out the window, and you're looking at creative solutions to have a positive impact on the community and have a positive impact on your overall organization. So if you look at it differently, it just opens up all kinds of doors.
Right. And on that note, look at any CPG company. How can you, or a beverage company, or water is your primary ingredient, how can you possibly, produce a product and not take, water conservation seriously? Like you have to be part of the solution, not only because the consumers demand it, but your product fundamentally relies on that. And it's the same thing is true, and your example is true in healthcare, because I know we're in the Northeast Corridor.
Yeah.
Right. How can you have production facilities in areas that are, that don't even have access to the quality of health, that of the devices that you're producing? There is such a social imbalance. Those things matter, right? Those things. Yeah.
Okay. We have time for one more question.
Oh my God, we went way over.
No, we didn't go way over. We're Robert and I are chatting, so I know exactly where we're at with time. We're good. So I want to wrap up because we talked about part of this whole conference is to talk about change, and we just listed off. I'm hopeful that people have a list of a couple of pages of notes of everything that we're looking to change or that should be changing within procurement. But how does this change impact the skills needed within procurement now and into the future? Because that's really where the rubber hits the road. And we're talking to everyone, 34 people today, and they might already have these skills and they could highlight them, or we might need to develop new ones.
So what's funny and almost ironic about this is the skills that everybody wants are the ones that are consultants are trained to have, and yet consultants are the ones that everybody makes fun of. And it's not because and actually deservedly so. So I'm not.
I was going to say I make fun of them all the time. So.
Yeah, no, I do too, because most of them are so arrogant that. But it's funny because you get trained. But I hear people say, "Well, I want people with the soft consulting skills," and what they're really saying is creativity, unconstrained thinking, a desire to learn, somebody that's relentless and is not going to stop at every roadblock. Because in consulting, you have no choice; you have to push through the roadblock. And most fundamentally, is relationship building, and this couldn't be any more important. Without relationship building in consulting, you don't survive, because that's how you get tapped into other opportunities, both internally and externally, and especially externally. And I say relationships because if you think about the end-to-end procurement process, who are you interacting with? Not just procurement, you're interacting with business users to whom you have to convince that, whatever you want to change is, you have to figure out how to influence them and change them. But also think about, your suppliers. You have to have relationships with your suppliers, but also IT, finance, HR, and on and on and on. And so often, and legal. So imagine trying to hit SLAs for procurement with a bad legal function. I'm sure that never happens.
Never happens. No.
Right. And so being able to actually influence and manage relationships is the critical part, is a critical skill. And all of those skills, you don't need to be a consultant to have. It's just everybody associates them with consultants. Because I can either train you on category management, and I've heard Amanda say this, but I can train you on category management. I can train you on any procurement process. What I can't train you to do is develop relationships and influence people. And then I can't train you to want to learn. You have to want to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been doing, and I mentioned this to my breakout group, but I've been doing a lot of thinking around this because I had a lot of exposure to how procurement was relating to their suppliers pre-COVID with the work that I did, and then during COVID. And what I came up with was a couple of things, and this is also true if you're leading any change in your organization or just trying to simply engage and relate to people. I came up with, we're coming up with 5 different things. So acting with authenticity. You have to be authentic. You need to know who you are, what your base is, but more importantly, who you're not, and what you're not going to stand for. Elouise, you're a perfect example of being authentic. You tell it like it is. You don't care if people don't like it. It is what it is, and you have fact to back it up. And I think more leaders, if they're truly authentic in how they're leading the change, they're going to get more buy-in and have those trusted relationships. The second one is leading the conversation. So what is your voice? How have you developed your voice? Are you letting fear get in the way of having a voice? And are you setting an environment within your team where other people have their voice? And that's a big thing where I know through some of the changes that I led, people would come up to me and they said, well, I thought about this a long time ago, but I just didn't know who to tell, or I didn't feel like anyone would listen. Right? That's not the environment that we need to be in through all of this change. Everyone needs to have your own voice and then inspire others to have it. Inspiring others. You mentioned it. How do you influence? How do you get the next big investment for that digital transformation that you want to do sold. Like, how do you go about doing this? You have to be able to inspire others and lead them to the water and inspire them to drink, right? Create content. I mentioned this story earlier on about how someone just said, well, everyone else is doing it, so we're investing in this technology too. That's not great content. Great content is a story that people understand not only where you're at today, but where you're going and how you're going to get there. And that could be through videos and through articles. That could be through conversations like we're having today. So there could be all kinds of different ways to create content. And then lastly is purposely engage. You have to engage your teams, your suppliers, your stakeholders in your vision, where you're going. And it's not only a one-time thing like, oh, I told them back in December of what we're doing. You have to purposely engage each individual that you're trying to have that relationship with so that they can see your passion, see your vision, and be part of it. So that's what I've learned through COVID, through all of this, is that we have work to do in each of those areas. Some people are bright, shining stars, but I really hope that we can embed more of that into our relationships moving forward.
Well said. So, I was writing notes. I was taking notes. That's good stuff.
I will. So, all right. So I think, Robert, I was 3 minutes late. Are we?
I mean, it was beautiful. It was perfect. So, and if anybody wants to unmute themselves and share a gift of what Amanda and Elousie